Back here, meanwhile, the government has been quite busy. It's published its border security, asylum and immigration bill designed to smash the gangs and clamp down on illegal migration.
Well, let's get an overview now with GB News presenter Matt Goodwin, because, Matt, 5 years since Britain left the European Union, and one of the biggest expectations, I think, from so many people was a greater control over migration, and yet, legal and illegal, I mean, it's not been a pretty picture.
No, that's true. I mean, the good news is we do have control over immigration policy in a way that EU member states do not. We could, if we wanted, elect a different government at the next election and have a radically different immigration policy. But as we've seen with the borders, we are still locked into things like the European Convention on Human Rights. We're still locked into things like Tony Blair's Human Rights Act. We still have, if you like, the legislative framework that prevents us from genuinely controlling our borders and deporting foreign national offenders. So what Labour are trying to do now with this new bill is demonstrate that they can finally do what nobody else has done, which is stop the small boats and the sort of invasion on the border. But they can't do that because the detail of this bill, I mean, they're going to try and disrupt the gangs. Smashing the gangs, as we know, won't deal with the underlying issue of demand. They're saying they're going to use counter-terrorism powers to do that. But what they're crucially going to do, Tom, and I know you're on top of this detail as well, is they're basically going to decriminalise illegal migration. They're going to overturn many of the key parts of Rishi Sunak's illegal migration bill, essentially incentivising more people to come.
This is the fascinating thing, because I don't know if they've done this on purpose or if this has been accidental, but the Illegal Migration Act, which passed in 2023, it had all of these different elements within it. So, for the first time, no illegal migrant could get citizenship if they came illegally. People, if they claimed to be children on the border, if they claimed to be under the age of 18, they'd actually be tested for that before they got, put in the school system. I mean, we've seen some bizarre cases of people who look more like they're 30 years old being placed in schools. And also this obligation that was placed on government in 2023 for the first time to remove illegal migrants either to their own country or a safe third country, which became the Rwanda scheme. All of those parts have now been removed, meaning now there's going to be a pathway to citizenship once more for illegal migrants. I mean, do you think this is deliberate or just a complete oversight from the government?
Yeah, I don't personally think Labour really wants to stop and deal with this crisis. And it's not only removing the illegal migration bill and parts of that. Also, remember, Tom and Emily, we've removed Rwanda. We've removed the active deterrent. We're still spending £3,000 a day on goods for illegal migrants coming in, clothes and so on, £5.4 billion a year. By the time of the next general election, we'll have spent somewhere around £60 billion dealing with this ongoing crisis. So there are more incentives for people to come over than there are disincentives. And that is fundamentally the problem at the heart of this crisis. I genuinely think, 5 years on from Brexit and so on, this is the really big problem in British politics. It is at the heart of everything. We still are not in control of our own borders, and that will generate seismic change in 2029.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is deliberate. I mean, to cast your mind back to the debate over the Illegal Migration Act, the Tories won, and people were saying, talking about the morals and the ethics of it and how if you arrive in this country, you should be able to claim asylum, whatever means you get here. It was quite controversial that the Conservatives said, well, hang on, if you arrive by boat, you are an illegal migrant, even if you want to claim asylum. But the Boris wave of immigration.
Unbelievable.
This is what I can't get over. A man who promised to the electorate of this country that we are going to control the borders. He swapped mass EU immigration for mass immigration from everywhere else. At the touch of a button, just without any conversation about it.
Well, the stats are absolutely mind-boggling. Here's just a couple. 86% of all immigration into Britain today is coming from outside of Europe. So it's not only that we're going to have another 10 million people coming in between now and 2047, which is what we saw this week with the Office for National Statistics. Almost all of those 10 million people will come from outside of Europe, from Africa, the Middle East and so on. More culturally different nations, shall we say, different values, different ways of life. It's also the influx of the relatives of workers. Now, what Boris said is we're going to have a points-based policy, the best of the best. What we have got since Brexit is the opposite. Just one stat to consider for viewers at home, because this will, I think, make them fall off their chairs. In the last half of 2024, take health and social care, because we're always told we need migration for health and social care. We gave 15,000 visas to workers in the health and social care system, 15,000. We gave 60,000 60,000 visas to their relatives. 60,000. This is how insane our immigration policy has become.
One social care worker that came over, they were bringing 4 family members.
So what we're doing, this is why, Tom, this is why mass immigration of the kind that we now have is making us poorer, not richer. This is the economic case for mass immigration is falling apart.
And it's not an on-off switch. It's often irreversible. They treat it as if it's, the economy needs a bit more of this, we'll just pull that lever.
But I'm so pleased in the way that we're discussing it, because politicians did pull the lever.
Yeah.
And so often I think we sit around tables like this and people say, the politicians lost control.
Yeah.
We don't control our migration. No, we do.
We do.
This was a positive decision that politicians made.
We do.
Perhaps they didn't think about the follow-on from that decision.
And just very briefly, we're talking a lot about Britain, but remember, 5 years on, what does the EU look like? And one of the things that is very clear from Germany to Austria, from France to Sweden, is that the mood music in Europe 5 years on from Brexit has become more Brexit in orientation, more critical of mass immigration, more determined to control their borders, no longer upholding Schengen. Now, we don't hear a lot about that among Remainers and rejoiners in Britain, but the EU is not a place that most Brits would look at and think, that's working well, I'd quite like to rejoin that, thank you very much. It is in chaos, economically, culturally, and of course, more than anything, demographically.
Yeah, and a lot of parties desperately trying to regain control of their own borders. Very interesting indeed, isn't it? Matt Goodwin, thank you very much indeed.
Well, here with us to discuss it is the former Conservative MP, Jonathan Gullis. Now, Jonathan, one of the strange things about this bill that the government is calling the Border Security Bill is that it actually repeals a lot of a bill that you voted for that was passed that became the Illegal Migration Act.
Well, like you say, Tom, it's just causing mass confusion yet again in the system. Ultimately, let's be perfectly frank, I think you've done actually yourself some very good tweets summarising what's going on. Number one, we've now effectively reintroduced a path towards citizenship for those people who arrive illegally in the country. We're now removing as well the scientific ability to actually determine whether someone is indeed a child, which of course many people claim to be. And then on the other side of things as well, we've got this fact that you can no longer remove people to a country of origin or a safe third country. So any deterrent is now being removed. And our whole hope is on the fact that we will be able to smash the gangs. Well, I think the public have heard enough of the rhetoric. I sadly think the proof will be in the pudding, and the pudding will be that more people needlessly risk their lives across the English Channel, therefore mean we'll see more death in the Channel, we'll see more people arriving on our shores, and the smugglers already know there's a 66% success rate when it comes to approving people to stay indefinitely. That will now rocket up even further when they are told that they can actually tell people, if you come to the UK, there is a route, there is a way to citizenship, so don't worry, get on the boat, risk your life, and you'll be calling your UK home soon.
Jonathan, I will come back to this, but I just want to ask you, because we've been talking quite a bit about the Boris wave of immigration, sort of bringing in sort of millions of people and the potential cost that will bring to our country in the years to come. Do you think the Conservatives have done enough to sort of apologise for that? Because there's a bit of an excruciating interview with the former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, where she sort of refused to apologise and said it was sort of the right thing to do at the time. But there's a palpable anger out there.
I think Emily, you've probably heard me many times before say, no, I don't think we've been apologetic enough. I think we're going to have to spend 2025 continuing to apologise before people are willing to even listen to any ideas or proposals that we put forward, and then to try and win credibility is an even tougher challenge in that regard. I think it's well known I was one of the most vocal voices on the backbench of the Conservative Party when it came to both illegal and legal migration, and obviously worked with existing colleagues like Danny Kruger to write a paper with suggestions, some of which were adopted just to get us back to the 200,000 figure. But that isn't good enough still. And I think we have to face up to reality that the Conservative Party has got a long way to go to rebuild its reputation. And I have said it before, and I get told by some former colleagues I'm being OTT with this, but I really do think we're in a perilous position. I think the fact that, as Tom pointed out, 7 opinion pollsters have reform ahead of us now, I suspected that would be the case in the early days, and Kemi does need time. But if we seem to think stupidly that these local elections are going to go good for us because people don't like Labour, we're kidding ourselves. The public still hate us. then in 2026 we could see us become one of the fourth or fifth largest party in Wales when Reform become maybe the official opposition, even, God forbid, the governing party of Wales. They might get 6-7 MSPs. They'll have a mayor in Dame Andrea Jenkins. They'll have 300 to 500 councillors, and the pressure that's going to put on the Conservative Party to either merger, which means the death of the Conservative Party as we know it, or try and come to some deal, which will mean the end of conservatism in some parts of the country, is going to be palpable. So it's a humongous task that's ahead of Kemi. And I don't think enough Conservative parliamentarians are fully aware that we've still got 2 years of pain to go through. And if they're not aware of it, then God almighty, they're going to have a hell of a shock in a couple of years' time.
Of course, you were a member of Parliament through not one, but two defenestrations of Conservative leaders in the last Parliament. We all know how, choppy and changey the Conservative Party could be. Do you foresee a situation, if things continue to go south for the Conservative Party, where there could be another leadership challenge?
Personally, Tom, I dread the idea of that happening, because if we have another leadership challenge, we just continue to look like we're inward looking, inward fighting, and not trying to have an outward looking proposal. And I think Kemi Badenoch actually is someone who would be deemed to be on the right of the Conservative Party. I'll just say I'm a Conservative in the Conservative Party. I think that is someone who actually understands kind of those core issues, and I think she does have some really good characteristics. One being in particular that she is very strong, very determined, and willing to speak her mind. And I think the public want a strong leader, whether that be a strong man or a strong woman. They want to see that. And if we end up, and that's why I'm worried about reality not hitting with Conservative MPs at this moment in time, because if they're not mentally prepared still for the pain that's still yet to come, because they seem to think we've hit the floor, things can always get worse as well as getting better. If they're not mentally prepared for that reality, then of course they'll panic, and then God forbid we'll end up in another leadership fiasco, and no one really wants to see that. So I hope that Kemi's given the time. I hope she does come up with robust policies. The biggest challenge is trying to win credibility. Now, how that's done, to be honest with you, I'm not even sure how we win that back. I think it's going to have to be doing things like Kemi did with the schools bill, where you find a hole in Labour's bill, as she did over the fact that there's going to be a cap on teacher pay, press that saw over and over again and force the government into a U-turn. That's how we can demonstrate credibility and responsibility and know-how to deliver, unlike our opponents in Reform who can talk the talk, but governing is very different to being in opposition.
Yeah, she has been quite good at that, to be fair, sort of pushing the button on a particular policy. Whether it's always the most sort of, headline-making area that she goes on at PMQs, it does show that she's interested in the detail. Jonathan Gullis, thank you very much indeed, former Conservative MP. Great to have you on, as always.